Hello, we're meaning making, telling our stories with the conviction that you are a story too.
My name's Andy Griffiths.
And my name's Imogen and Andy.
And this is the second in a series of conversations about making meaning. Barack Obama said, whatever else human beings are, they are stories. So it seemed to Imogen and me that it was really important that everyone has a chance to shape the story of lockdown and shape the story of, well, people are calling it emergence for them. Everyone's story is going to be different. So maybe if we tell ours, that'll kind of spark something in you as well.
And in our first conversation, we started to tell the story of lockdown, but how else are you telling the story of lockdown, Andy?
Okay, so here's some of the things I remember. I remember back at the beginning of lockdown, all of us started doing Ready, Steady, Cook. That is, we started preparing meals from increasingly eccentric collections of ingredients. I think at one point I combined kind of liquidized broccoli with cider vinegar and frozen vegan ragu and tinned artichoke and spaghetti and chilies in olive oil. And okay, so put it this way, it wasn't a success. I found myself baking. I have no talent for baking. I never before felt that baking was a good thing to do. And I baked some scones that had so much bicarbonate of soda in that human beings couldn't eat them. And I put them on the bird table, and the pigeons wouldn't eat them. And then some little birds started pecking at them. And my wife Alison said, well, they've got smaller brains than the big birds. That's why they're still having a go. And then a little bit later, they gave up as well. So I remember all of that stuff. I remember I became an admin on a Facebook page, and somebody tried to post, put a post on there offering toilet paper as a free gift for those buying cannabis from them. And I wanted to accept the post, and my fellow admins had to talk me out of it. Speaking of Facebook, well, if you're a Facebook user, I reckon that's one really good way to have a record of this time in history. Because maybe one day your grandchildren will ask you, Grandma Imogen, what did you do in the Great Lockdown?
Yeah, absolutely. But not everybody does Facebook, do they? And there's always old-fashioned journaling. Or with my children, we did a collage, and I said it was for the children, but I think I found it a very therapeutic experience, perhaps more than they did. And this might work if I try and, I can't share my screen, I don't think. Anyway, the collage was all plague. We had Spanish flu. A phrase that I always go back to is things fall apart, the centre cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, which is Yeats, but Chinua Achebe used it as the title for one of his books, of someone I'm a fan of. And then we had faith at home, school at home, we had pictures of Zoom. And then in the top corner, we had hope leading up to the NHS, with Julian's phrase, all shall be well and all shall be well. So that was sort of, I find that really helpful to sort of gather pictures from the newspaper and create this sort of visual record of what we were going through. At one point, my sons just started a production line of making rainbows. I think they must have made about 50 rainbows, which they said they were going to send to people, but I don't think we ever managed to do that. But I suppose we'll also be looking, I don't know, will we be looking at photo albums? But we'll have pictures of people in a street standing apart from each other, clapping. My children loved doing that on Thursday nights, and they took out their chalk and they wrote, we love the NHS, we love postal workers, all on the street. But when we see pictures like that, we'll be like, ah, 2020 picture.
Exactly. Do you think people will say, you know, at the moment, we might say it's all gone a bit pear-shaped. Do you think in the future people will say it's all gone a bit 2020 when unexpected things happen in that life? But maybe it won't mean pear-shaped. Maybe it'll mean something that's a more positive transition from one way of being to another. I don't know.
I do wonder if we're going to structure our narratives now around pre-COVID and post-COVID. I think it will be one of those massive boulders in our history, that this massive shock that reshapes our thinking and the way that we tell stories. And I was intrigued. We did a collage much later on into lockdown, and it was quite different. There was sort of less intensity and a bit more complicated. We had the whole coming saga, you know, cutting out signs to the castle. But then we had Black Lives Matter protests. We had the statues falling. We had questions around green recovery and the environment. And also, how are we going to emerge? How are we going to do society in a new way? What would social distancing look like for us, and hand sanitizing and masks? But I'm also aware that for some people, it will be great to hear these stories if people felt able to tell them, stories of heartbreak, illness, loss, and absence. And I think the most difficult moment for me in lockdown was when I heard about the young boy that died, and his mother wasn't allowed to be at his side in the hospital. It was in the early days. And that just left me completely overwhelmed with emotion, anger, fear, panic, sense of sort of utter outrage. What was this thing that stops the mother being able to comfort her child as he died? And that was a really, really low point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So remembering and keeping memories will sometimes be quite a heartbreaking thing, but still really important. I know of a church where they're building a cairn. So that's like a pile of stones, like at one time you'd have on pilgrimage routes, maybe you still do. And the way they're doing it is they're saying, well, there'll be a queue, inevitably. I mean, this is a very British kind of emergence, because there's everywhere. So there'll be a queue outside the church. And when you arrive at the back of the queue, you pick up a stone from a pile of stones there, and you carry it with you until you get to the front of the queue. Maybe it feels a bit heavy by the time you get to the front. Maybe that's part of the point. And then you put it on a cairn that marks the time we're living through and the presence of God in it, but also, because we need to be honest, don't we, the heaviness of it for many people. Another idea that I heard that is kind of a bit like journaling and collages and Facebook and cairns, is the idea that a rabbi shared on a Citizens UK seminar I was in. And she talked about the Ark of the Covenant in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, God says to the people of God, why don't you get a box and put some significant objects in it? Stick the 10 Commandments in, stick Aaron's stick in, because he did a miracle with that. Stick some manna in, that's the special food that you're eating here in the wilderness. Put them in the box, and they'll still be there years in the future when you're a bit more settled again, and you're looking back at this wilderness time and trying to remember what it was like. So the rabbi said, so we've done that, or we've encouraged the households in our synagogue to do that, each to have a box to put some of their significant lockdown things in.
Mm. That really resonates with me, because on our church at home page, I was encouraging people to have sacred places in their homes, so to set up a little altar. Because I think what's particularly hard for us as Christians is that our sort of foundational act of remembrance, which is the Eucharist or Holy Communion, has been largely taken away from us. So the way that we remember who we are before God, we've been excluded from. And I know lots of us were quoting, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? But we do have the memory of the Eucharist, and we know who we are and who we're called to be. But I suppose for me, it's figuring out how we live sort of alienated from our own rituals, because that's what sort of happened to us. And perhaps that could actually be really insightful and creative, because being an outsider, being locked out, being excluded is also part of the Christian narrative, isn't it? So what do those insights give us? And I wonder also if this experience of lockdown has helped us perceive some of those awful injustices in our society, and the prejudice and the lack of equality in our communities, because we've been forced to see as outsiders see. So I think and hope and pray that it could be potentially an incredibly sort of creative time for rethinking.
Yeah, well, I hope so. But I think what counts is, how do you tell the story? You've heard from Imogen and me, but how do you tell it? We'll be sharing another Making Meaning soon, and do watch this space for some information about our first Making Meaning Live. We don't really know what that means, but we think that maybe we're going to be inviting you to join us for a conversation where we all share and shape our lockdown and emergent stories. Thank you for listening.